And I volunteered to do the meet in 1988, which was celebrated as the 50th anniversary of the Bantam Car. And it was sometime prior to that, I met through a gentleman by the name of Bob Lindy, Ralph Turner, and Ralph was planning on coming down to the meet. And on this particular meet, Chet Hempfling's health had declined, and we knew that he was not going to make it into town to see the cars. So a number of members made it a point that year in '88 to go out and see him. He lived about 3 miles west of town. And there was probably 3 or 4 visits by various groups of people to go out and see Chet. And it must have been maybe getting close to the final day of the meet, and Ralph Turner and his friend Bob Lindy from Corey, Pennsylvania, that's where Ralph was living, wanted to go out and see Chet Hempfling. So the 3 of us went out and visited with Chet, and that's where Chet told me and showed us the shears that he used at the factory. And I can still see them sitting there today. Ralph, dressed in a suit and tie and with a little business hat on, always looked like he was ready to sell a car to somebody. And Chet sitting there with his plaid shirt and torn pants and his hair pulled back in a ponytail, looking all roughed up and unkempt. And it just looked like just 2 different social classes sitting there together, but they were friends and they talked a long time and reminisced. And one thing I remember was Chet had different things sitting around. He had a Bantam trailer there. He had some engines in an old shed that came out of a Bantam car. And here was a carburetor laying on the top of it looked like a shelf, and it was just laying out in the elements. And I said, Chet, I said, this isn't a Bantam or an Austin carburetor. I said, what's this off of? And he said, oh, that's a Stromberg off of a Bantam Jeep. And years down the road, I realized, gee, that's like a $1,000 item laying there out in the middle of the elements. But I would say we were probably there for a half hour or 45 minutes and took a picture of Chet and Ralph sitting there on the tailgate of Chet's old pickup truck. And then before we left, Chet was sitting there by himself, and he brought out some shears, which we'll be showing you in a video, saying that these were shears that were specifically bought at the time they were working on the BRC project. And what was unique about them is you could go right up through a sheet of 20 gauge metal, and you didn't have to fold it up and down to get through. It would just go right up through the middle. And fortunately, I befriended Chet's nephew. His name was Lee Osborne, and Lee handled the closing of Chet's estate when Chet died in the late 80s, just shortly after our visit there. And Lee knew that I was really interested in Chet stuff, and he gave me the shears. He was holding them one day. He said, these were almost lost. He said, we had a tool sale out here, and we had all these tools laid on a big tabletop after Chet's passing. And, if you ever go to a flea market, guys love tools. They go first. And he said, I sure hope that those didn't get on that table and get sold that day. And it was sometime after that he called me. He says, hey, I still have Chet's shears. And I said, are you sure they're the ones? And he said, oh yeah, they have his initials on them. And they were the ones that he had when, you took that picture. And I kind of wiped my brow and a sigh of relief. And I said, well, I'll be out to talk to you sometime. I'd just like to talk about Chet. And so he showed me the shears that day, and he said, I hope I can find a safe place for these. And I said, yeah. I said, they're still working on a museum downtown, and I don't know what's going to come of that. But yeah, we'll do something with them. And I started to turn and walk away from Lee, and he stopped me, and he says, here, Bob, you take these. He says, I'll know they'll be in good hands. And then later on, I bought the old blue Bantam coupe that Chet had, and he always claimed that that was serial number 1 Bantam, and it did have a serial number 1 plate on it, and you could tell that they experimented with it. In fact, that Bantam that Chet drove around in, the coupe, and the instrument cluster, it also had the water temperature gauge. So probably during the BRC production, where they had to add that water gauge for probably government specifications, he probably borrowed one of those instrument clusters and put it in that Bantam car. And that was probably one of the few Bantam cars that actually had water temperature. And then everything else was the same on it. Another interesting thing about that car was, because it was a very early car, and he claims it was serial number 1, it had the high grille with the 15 bars. And you can tell that they experimented with it to see how many louvers they could cover up before it began to overheat. And the top 2 louvers, as they later put into production, you can see were puttied over with a little piece of sheet metal. And that car, when I bought it off of Chet for only $1,000, still had that puttied over louver at the top to make it look like a later model. And he had also put a 3-main engine in it to make it run a little bit better. He had the gas tank in the back. The gas tank was not in the cowl anymore, it was in the back. And it had a fuel pump. And what was funny is, you know, Bantam doesn't have that much power to begin with, but Chet had added a little ball for a trailer hitch on the back. And talking to some people after I saw that, they said, oh yeah, you know, Chet had a little boat, and he would put a boat on a little trailer he made, and it wouldn't be unusual to see Chet driving up Route 19 to go the whole way up to Lake Erie to go fishing, driving that little Bantam car 100 miles up to Erie. So Chet enjoyed the outdoors, and I think in some of the black and white photos that came out of the factory that Walter Hempling took pictures of, there's some pictures there with a guy in a Bantam coupe, and it looks like it might be the same one, with a deer laying over the front fender. So my thinking is that Chet probably took the Bantam out hunting in November one year and got himself a deer, and not having a better place to put it, he laid it over the crease there in the front fender, and the head was hanging out over the headlights. So Chet kind of took under his wing some of the old items that came out of the factory. He has, and I have it now, supposedly what was the first 3-main engine, and you could tell that it was, you know, welded up to be modified with the different crankshaft, and the center hub inside the crankcase is a little bit larger. So there's some different things about it. The post in the front that holds the front stand for the engine was welded. So, and then somebody stamped engine number 66001 on there for the first 3-main. And he claims that it was in that blue car for a while, and he wore it down, and now there was another 3-main in there. So he had some old engines, and then out of the factory, and I don't know if the Bantam Company paid for this, but he certainly laid claim to it, as the set of Shears, and it has his initials stamped in the metal right up here by the knot, and it says CJH. And some close-up pictures, stills have been taken of this, which you can look at. But if you look at this straight on, you can see how that could go straight through a piece of sheet metal, with the one side being here and then the other side over here, and only having to fold down 1/4 inch for it to pass through. So you could make a straight cut through a piece of 20 gauge and not have any distortion in the metal at all. They even have a little cut in the nut here that allows this sheet to pass straight through. But these are the Shears that Chet was holding that day in 1988, probably in August. I'd have to check to see what month that meet was held, but I think it was August. And he was holding them like this, and this is them. we have since learned, and Chet, I don't think, ever shared the information with us, but of course when he handed these, I'm thinking body tub, I'm thinking, you know, side panels, the back panel that holds the spare tire, all that stuff, you know, was cut, you know, by these shears. And we since have learned that those first body tubs were made by the company in York, Pennsylvania, and these were probably reduced to cutting out maybe the slots in the first hoods, which were a little fancier than they needed to be with the rounded nose in the front, and these were used to maybe cut those slots and maybe small pieces that were put in the floor, who knows. But Chet did identify these shears as being ones that worked on the first Jeep, the first BRC. And when he left the factory, they went with him and survived all the years in his workshop, and fortunately were not sold for $5 at the flea market sale for all of his tools. Chet also, on his own, as his own project, probably because he was in Austin and maybe realized that there was no real good record kept of all the serial numbers and the body numbers on the Austin cars, that when they quickly began production of the new Bantam car in 1938, he wanted to keep a record of all the serial numbers. The only bad thing about how this was done, I don't know if any BRC collectors would be interested in this, but the serial number for the body, which was stamped with some kind of a hand stamp on the side here, always was very close to the serial number on the motor. So here's body number 60-456, and it's matched up with engine number 60-159. And I don't know if their intention was to keep them tracking, but almost right off the bat, the engine numbers and the body numbers got out of sequence. And this is all Chet's handwriting in here, because he was the one who did this at the final inspection. And he made note of the engine serial number that went in that body car, whether it was right-hand steer, left-hand steer, whether it was a roadster or a panel truck or a pickup truck or a boulevard delivery. Bantam sold a lot of chassis with no bodies on them at all, and different companies put different things on them. Later on, he added notes. At one point in time, you know, they would change the emergency brake, and we have the serial number that for the 1939 model where the emergency brake came straight up out of the floor. That's noted in here. They later went to a bigger radiator, which was 5 quarts. Chet noted that in here. And then later on, he noted well, which cars went to auto shows in New York. He also noted a point in time where he added the color. And I don't know how many Bantam owners have contacted me and said, Bob, you know, when I bought the car it was yellow, but you were saying it was green. And sure enough, we sanded through all those layers of paint, and there was that original paint laid down that was green. So that's created a lot of excitement. Being somebody that's kind of rubbed elbows with Corvette collectors, you know, you kind of brag when you have a Corvette and you say the numbers match, it's a big deal. And after Chet let the information out of this book, then that kind of became a thing within the Bantam collectors, saying, I still have the original engine, the numbers match. So you go to the back, and this would be of interest to the people celebrating the BRC 75th. They stopped production of the civilian cars in May, maybe into June, and then they began to write down the serial numbers of the first 70 prototype Jeeps. He skipped a few pages, and then he got into the Bantam Jeeps. And this is page 184. There's some still photos been taken of this. And I'm thinking that the pilot car, which Duncan Rolls duplicated or replicated, probably had no serial number. Maybe it was 1,000, I don't know. But they started 1001, and went to 1,070. So those were the pilot cars. Then the Continental engine number, the military W assignment number. Chet noted here the type of steering, whether it was two-wheel steer. They did have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 four-wheel steers out of those 70s. He made a note here about a large drive shaft, so I don't know if they had a drive shaft problem or maybe that was going to be used to tow something heavier. And then the dates they were built, or at least the dates they were cleared for delivery. And November 29th, 1940, so right after Thanksgiving, to the end of November was a second inspection group. And then a real small group here from December the 1st, 1940 to December the 2nd. And a little larger group here up to December the 3rd. Then we go to December the 11th and the 12th, and it looks like they were just kind of sputtering out the cars. Of course, these were four-wheel steers, which needed some extra work on the chassis to take the tie rods. So the last ones made were December 11th, 12th, 2 on the 12th, the 16th, the 16th, and then 3 on the 17th, and then that was it. But this is Chet's. And he always claimed ownership to this and kept it very secret. But then when the club became active and guys were interested in their serial numbers, he did, through George Domer, who was our club historian for a long time, and of course George recently passed away. George and Chet worked together. If you sent George Domer a letter saying, I have a Bantam car and this is the serial number, give me the date of delivery and tell me if it still has the original engine. So Chet's foresight and interest in keeping this stuff has really helped, us collectors today. So that's pretty much. I wish I would have got to know Chet better. He flattered me when I went out there that day, because I did radio work here in Butler, and I was always on the air in the morning reading news. And I went out, and Turner was there, and Bob Lindy, and he came down the steps, and I introduced myself, and he says, oh, he said, yeah. He said, you weren't on the radio this morning. So he must have been a listener of mine. Poor guy. Maybe that's what wore him out. I don't know.